Welcome back to beyoungministry.blogspot.com and to the Be Young Ministry YouTube page. Glad you're joining us today. We continue in our blog and podcast of Ephesians chapter 6, verses 12 and 13, which reads, "For our struggle is not against flesh and blood, but against the rulers, against the authorities, against the powers of this dark world, and against the spiritual forces of evil in the heavenly realms. Therefore put on the full armor of God, so that when the day of evil comes, you may be able to stand your ground. And after you have done everything, to stand." That's Ephesians 6, 12 and 13. Paul describes the battle that we're engaged in as a struggle. This battle is not waged against people, it's waged against unseen forces. When we think, what we think is an argument with another human is merely the agitation caused by unseen forces of wickedness. These forces want to distract us from what is most important, which is the application of the gospel of the Lord Jesus to people's lives. God's kingdom is not advanced with swords. It's not a flesh and blood battle. It's a spiritual battle. It is advanced with spiritual weaponry. Note that Paul refers to the whole armor in verse 12. We must be careful to appropriate all the pieces of this armor because each piece complements the other. In other words, our effectiveness depends upon the appropriation of each and every piece in our spiritual armor. This is to be done daily, by the way. The appropriation of this armor yields in the believer's life stability. Paul uses the word stand, which we considered yesterday. This stability, or this determination to not move, is the product of each piece of weaponry, which will each bring us back to the one thing in the economy of God that creates the greatest strength. And this one thing is the gospel of the Lord Jesus. The gospel creates stability in the believer because it has done everything that we need for life on this earth and the life beyond. And this gospel is all of God, not of us. This is why it creates so much stability in us. It's God's product, not ours. We will know when this gospel is defining us when our theology is all about God and not about us. So much of American Christendom is defined by the flesh of the believer. It is obvious when the flesh, or the evil desires within us, is defining us. The products of the flesh are condemnation, guilt, unbelief, fear, and the like. This weaponry is designed to tackle such enemies, and it is a profound understanding of the gospel which frees us from the false teaching that says we must add to Christ's work in order to experience the freedom that Christ died to give us. It's amazing how many people I meet who don't have the assurance of their salvation. They're not sure if they're going to heaven. And they will always follow it up with, "Well, I've been good." Folks, we can't be good enough. That's why the Lord Jesus came to live the life we couldn't live. He came to die the death we couldn't die. He came to be raised from the dead that we could not experience apart from him. Everything physical is preceded by the metaphysical. In verse 12, Paul refers to the heavenly realms. What we do with the heavenly realms, or the spiritual realm, will determine what happens around us in the physical realm. Take note of how the enemy is described in verse 12. Authorities, powers, spiritual forces of evil. These angelic beings are bad. they fell with Satan, and they are behind the troubles in our world. Jude tells us they left their proper place. Peter tells us in his second epistle that the angels sinned. They had a free will, and they fell from their position of obedience, according to Peter. These are inferior deities, which is what the word demons means. The Lord Jesus encountered 6 different individuals who were possessed by demons. The goal of these demons is to deceive and destroy mankind. Satan is given 5 names and 24 titles in the New Testament. The Lord Jesus was given 250 names and titles. In verse 13, Paul tells us that God has provided for us the full armor of God. Although God has provided the armor, we must put it on. And when we appropriate or put on this weaponry, we rise to the viewpoint of God in the heavenly or spiritual realm. And it is only from this vantage point of the heavenlies that we recognize this life as it truly is. In fact, when we have this viewpoint, we recognize that all things work together for the good of the believer. My oldest son garnered a job right out of college, which only lasted a few months. One day his boss came to him and let him know that he could not afford him as an employee, so he would have to let him go. From the human standpoint, I wanted to rip his head off his shoulders. That is, the head of the boss. But from God's perspective, we learned that it was one of the most important things that has ever happened to my son. You see, he took a job that he probably would not have taken had he had other choices. But given the circumstances of being let go by his previous employer, he took the second job. And while at the second job, he trained to make and install the PLC. This is when his professional career started to take shape. Learning about the programmable logical control enabled my son to discover his love, and today he is happy doing what he loves, making and installing PLCs all over the country. It is from the spiritual realm that we are granted the ability to see how all things work together for our good. Finally, if I had acted on my desire to rip my son's first boss's head off, I would have been doing the bidding of the evil, unseen world. My friends, I trust this podcast and this blog is helpful to you in your walk with the Lord. If I could be in any further assistance to you, feel free to shoot me an email at beyoungministry@gmail.com. Hey, have a great day.